Hi, everybody. Thanks, Alia. And please, if you have anything to add in jam music, we'll happily listen and continue on. Excited for Fireside today. We have two special guests as well as some other folks from Daylight. I think I see Melissa here. Thanks for joining. We're really excited for the conversation. This week is Internet Age Institutions in Kernel, and I'll just say a few words on the topic before we move forward. One quick administrative note is that Expo is next week. We are looking forward to the presentations. I think there's already 35 signups, so there's really only five-ish, six slots left. So please do RSVP if you're interested. We're looking forward. It looks like it's going to be a great showing for day one and day two, next Tuesday and Wednesday. Internet age institutions. So we're at a particular part in the syllabus where we're switching from the looking back in what's kind of been the history of the web, the history of the financial system, to where we sit today in the story of the internet. The hope with this part of the syllabus is to look forward with a cautiously optimistic view on what styles of institutions might be created on the internet and what might be different about them. And I want to start with a little quote from the beginning of the module. So this is just from that intro section. It starts with Ivan Illich, who comes up in this. It says, fundamental social change must begin with a change in consciousness about institutions. A viable future turns on the rejuvenation of institutional style. At stake in the choice between institutions is the very nature of human life. We must choose whether to be rich in things or in the freedom to use them. And later it says, the radical alternative way to fill available time is access to institutions which can increase the opportunity and desirability of human interaction. Increase the opportunity and desirability of human interaction. That's Ivan Illich from Deschooling Society. And so this gets into some thoughts on relationship and reciprocity. And there's this one key line that I'm hoping to get back to with Kia and Anjan, where we say we'll ask what it means to learn or heal or create or move of our own accord, and how we can create networked institutions premised on spontaneous voluntary use, rather than coercive force. And for whatever reason, I think about when Anjan talks about the blue light and moving away from it and the coercion that that can feel like in this day and age. And I can't help but think of Kia and Anjan's work in the context of these networked institutions. The module kind of continues onwards with a couple of key points. It talks about institutions, namely having an impact on how we identify ourselves, how we reach consensus, and how we experience time. There's a couple of other parts here from the cypherpunks. There's a module on governance, and we flip it a bit and look at what it means to govern ourselves. Govern yourself is the tongue-in-cheek title. And the cypherpunks talking about building tools that give people the means to govern themselves, making good governance at higher levels inevitable. And then this idea that better tools are those which help us help each other more effectively, which I think of daylight again in this context. This is also the module where we feature one of Kia's works called Inventories, Not Identities from 2021. It's the module entitled Who Are You? And there are many answers to the question of identity and online identity, and it's a big focus in this module. But one quote from Kia has helped us along the way, which says, composable identity approaches identity as inherently relational, defined in relation to authority, environment, and self. And we really want to get into it. We may come back to some other stuff, but I'll do a brief intro of Kia, and then Alia and John will help with Anjan's, and welcome any contributions along the way from Melissa Turner, who's also here from Daylight. But for Kia, she's really been an influence on Kernel since the beginning. In 2021, Inventories Not Identities was written. That was included in the syllabus pretty much right around the time it was written. And later that year, she helped us lead a guild called DAOs and Dragons, which in large part was based off of another post that she wrote called The Prehistory of DAOs. That was 2021, and I think really introduced us to Kia and her work. She had been kind of like deep into a stint at Gnosis at the time, helping build the Gnosis safe, and at Gnosis Guild was focused on all sorts of tools and infrastructure that you could build on top of a multi-sig. And she worked on that for 5 years, and we kind of saw as she transitioned in 2022 to thinking a lot more about memory. And it seems to be a topic that she's thought about for much longer than 2022, but memory and mediums of memory was a talk she gave in 2022 at FWV Fest. And the continuation of that seems to be a focus on a book called Artificial Memory, and some writing that she's done on it in the last year or two has us excited about both her ideas about memory and more recently how memory leads us perhaps further to a re-enchantment. And she's left Gnosis, she's focused on the book, and seems to have moved somewhere really wonderful into the mountains in the northeast of the United States. And I think these two things seem to be related. So we're just happy to have Kia back in this new context as a continuation. And Kia, just thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Alia, would you mind helping and perhaps with Anjan?
Yes, thank you as well, Anjan and Melissa, for being here from Daylight. My introduction to Anjan and Daylight came about a little less than a year ago. Vivek and I went to the pop-up village Edge Esmeralda in California, and probably the most impactful day for me was this day of the health tech unconference. And that was my first learning about Daylight and what Anjan was building there and his vision. It was my first real contact point also with the idea of our circadian rhythm and its effects on biology. And so I had a great time learning about that, as you can also see from my blue light blocking glasses that I often wear now. And we were also really lucky that Anjan joined us last block for a fireside where we really got to learn more deeply about his vision and his reasons and his long journey building Daylight, which I'm really excited for you all to learn more about today, and also just to learn about the continuity of how that journey has been going, what Daylight is up to most recently. And I'd also like to invite John, if John X, if you're willing to share a bit too. You were enthused when you heard that he was joining us today.
Yes, put me on the spot. Yeah, I was really excited. Anjan, I don't know that much about your work, but I was really inspired by a podcast episode you did. I think it was maybe a year ago now, and you talked a bit about how your life philosophy, at least at that moment, was that of phototropism. And I found that really inspiring and really resonated as I've been trying to make my own way and kind of sense of how to authentically create in a world where I feel a lot of pressure to create in a certain way. So maybe I'll leave it at that. I've kind of transcribed a bit of what you said and posted it in Slack. So maybe if it comes up a bit later, we can pull it out and jog your memory of what you said.
I think I might do it now just because it's so good. There's this idea, and John, you're welcome to read from it if you have a part, but I really thought the part at the bottom was really good. So phototropism is how plants grow towards maximizing their access to sunlight. If you plant beside a window, they'll grow in a way that angles them towards the sun. To me, that's a beautiful vision for what life can look like. There's always this subtle attractor of the sun. I think the suggestion here was something to the effect of, instead of the goals or the vision, there's this life philosophy of trusting the bottom up clues, give up on controlling, give up on working backwards from the objective. Sometimes the best algorithm for going through reality is not working backwards from an objective, but pursuing what's most interesting.
This is something I've been reflecting a lot in the last few months, and I'm like a little hesitant to even say it, but the quote from the link that I'm included at the bottom there is from The Fountainhead. And in that, Howard Rourke talks about how he does things because he loves doing it, not because of some potential outcome it might have in the future. And even if there's a lot of controversy and I'm not fully aligned with everything, that idea really resonated with me. And I think kind of is what you speak to, Anjan, this like bottom up, tuning into your intuition, what feels right now, and trusting that eventually that's going to lead somewhere beautiful.
I think it's a wonderful place to start. I mean, maybe both for Anjan and Kia, just what's been most interesting.
Yeah, well, I sort of forgot I say that. I believe that philosophy deeply, but I'm like, damn, that's more articulate than I can be today. So wish me luck. I think the sort of, if people in the group have read a book called Why Greatness Cannot Be Planned, it basically speaks to the same life philosophy. If you read the Tao Te Ching, it speaks to the same life philosophy. If you read Vedic early Hindu philosophy, it speaks to the same philosophy. If you read Rick Rubin's newest book, it speaks to the same life philosophy. And it's super hard and super easy to implement. Because in some sense, like, there's no such thing as effort in this thing. It's sort of like taking the path least resistance. Like, I guess this is the way things are going. I feel this is where my instinct is. And that is such an easy thing to do because you just feel like lazy all the time. Or it's like, I don't know, you're sort of sleep deprived, you're hanging out with your friends and you like don't even put in the effort to get rid of resting bitch face, but your friends still love you. You're just sort of like a win-win. It's like that for all of life where you're like, I'm not even gonna try. I'm just gonna show up. And that is inherently easy. But what makes it so hard is it also is like, I'm showing up with resting bitch face with my friends. Like, fuck me. Like, I'm not efforting. I'm like, what's wrong with me? Why am I not trying? Why am I not putting energy in? And so there is sort of like there's sort of a great difficulty. Like, am I being like apathetic? Am I like not trying hard enough? Like, am I not being agentic? Am I not being founder mode or whatever you want to call it? Like, what if I'm too passive? And I think that's so hard because so much of the early success in life, especially in school, especially in sports, especially starting companies or movements or communities, it's like, oh, nothing's going to happen until you do it. Like the world by default is entropy, but the world by default is gravity that will cause you to smack your face on the ground if you don't do something. And so therefore, the only thing that will exist is you bootstrapping yourself every day, making something that was not going to happen. It's because of me. It's because of this effort. It's because I don't snooze my alarm. It's because of discipline. And I think it's sort of true, but it's not always true. And I don't think it's eventually true if you're committed enough to sort of the cause of cleaning yourself up, like letting go, sort of surrendering. Like, once again, I think the hardest part here is we're all so sort of, I'm just making a bunch of assumptions too, but we're all sort of numb. We're all sort of traumatized. We're all sort of like stuck in many ways because, you know, in the past we weren't able to get over it, and you sort of just have to survive. You have to get your next internship. You have to get your next job. You still have to show up to work on Monday. And I think the problem with that then is we've just accumulated a lot of cruft, both like physiologically, psychologically, like soul level. And so if you're like, I will take the path of least resistance, like I will take the least effort, like I won't try. I'll just be like, don't try, resting bitch face energy all the time. And then it's like, oh my God, I'm just going to end up on my couch smoking weed, eating Doritos, and playing video games. Like, why would I do anything? Like, why would I do anything hard? Everything's hard. Like, organizing a party is hard. Like, coordinating with that many people is hard. Like, anything in life is actually a lot of work. Like, why would I do any of it? And I think that's the hard part, is that's sort of true. When your system is full of cruft, like it deeply wants to like not be willful. It doesn't want to be in willpower. It doesn't want to be in discipline. It doesn't want to be this top down, do the right thing, be the analytical. Tim Ferriss told me this is what successful people do. And so of course it wants to do the opposite. It's like a child that finally gets freedom. So I think the tough part in this sort of phototropism, take the path of least resistance, live life bottom up, wherever your instinct takes you, versus, that's the smart goal I need to work backwards from. The hard part is it sort of is a better is worse in my experience, at least, where sort of taking this mindset is ultimately better. But in the short term, unless you've sort of cleaned yourself up internally, there's a lot of cruft. It is more Doritos on the couch than it is like suddenly magically, you know, following your passion and all the synchronicities coming. And you sort of just have to have the faith that it eventually works out. That like, oh, wow, I'm like missing a lot of my morning workouts because I'm not shaming myself in the morning anymore. It's like, okay, I don't feel like doing it. And it's like, you might be a little bit less healthy in the short term, or at least have a slightly higher body fat percentage. Like that, there is a process and a space of getting worse until you get better, because we have so much stuff in us. But my sort of whole shebang is, if you are committed to this, you get closer and closer to a childlike state. And what I mean by this is, like, if you give a kid like complete freedom, it's not like they're only eating Doritos and on the couch. Actually, a lot of them are overstimulated. A lot of them, their nervous systems are screwed by modern society. But if they sort of, you see them unadulterated by modern society, it's like they want to go outside and like grab banana slugs, and they want to go play, and they want to, you know, use a magnifying, I guess it's sort of sadistic, right? They're trying to cut banana slugs in half and use a magnifying glass to burn ants. But other than that stuff, it's like they want to play and explore and learn things and ask 10 questions to the next door neighbor who comes by. It's like, none of that is effortful. It's just in our nature to sort of be curious, to sort of follow our instincts, to follow our intuition. And we lose it along the way because we need to learn math and trigonometry and how to hold your fork the proper way when you eat. And so I think actually at the essence of phototropism is sort of getting back to our real essence while still having the skills and knowledge of an adult. And I think that's super damn hard.
Yeah. I really want to see what Kia's thoughts are here, especially given your recent transition to the mountains, and just how have you been and all of the things.
Yeah, this is all super relevant and a really nice through line. Really appreciate everything you just said, because I think about these questions all the time, and it's changed so much for me over the last like 5-10 years. Because I think there's the question at the center of like, do I expend effort? What am I doing? Why is it when that I feel the most effortless, I feel kind of the most agential in a way, right? And I think a lot of that comes down to like being able to not kind of consciously know what you want, but almost unconsciously or subconsciously kind of know what you want and go towards it. And I think of this in the sense of like, it takes a long time to kind of feel what your body wants, feel like kind of something that you desire in a way that isn't necessarily what you think you should want, right? Or what you think you should be doing. It's something that you kind of like navigate to the more you kind of get to know your environment or the ecology around you or your friends around you, the more you get to know these kind of relationships, it's much easier to have this because I feel like the kind of like nuanced like effort without effort that is striving towards is like it's not necessarily that you should yourself into the action, but it's this idea of kind of like you so fully like identify with the action that you don't identify with it anymore. Like there's no kind of space for like an ego to be like, oh, hey, I'm doing this thing because I should do X, Y, Z. It's like I'm doing this thing because like certain life experiences or things that I feel passionate about are like unfolding themselves and I'm going toward them. And the conditions feel somehow kind of toward that thing. And sometimes you hit some corners, sometimes you have some experiences that like, you know, contract more. And sometimes you think, oh, I shouldn't go that way or I shouldn't go past that thing. But while this is all very abstract, I think about it a lot in the context of today's discussion of like, what do we think about kind of like non-coercive kind of political systems or institutions or otherwise, because a lot of being able to exist peacefully with others or to exist in a kind of a way where your agencies are like mutually compatible is about like kind of knowing why you're acting and knowing why you're doing what you're doing and knowing how to act kind of in a way that feels aligned and feels that kind of like effortlessness. And you can know why when you come into conflict, what the root of that conflict kind of really is. And a lot of the time it's like not what you think it is, right? It's something else. It's a previous trauma. It's something in the past. It's you know, a kind of structural issue. It's like all these other things. And so often when we're kind of like you know, you could say like full of cred, like we can't see that, but also there's a sense in which just like kind of self-acceptance of like however you are at that moment much more easily allows you to interact and kind of enact a type of pluralism and a type of mutualism because the situation feels much more clear, feels much more effortless. Yeah, that's a very much more abstract than I thought I would lead in with, but just those are my like initial thoughts on like hearing phototropism for the first time.
Yeah. I do wonder, Ki, if you're willing, because you mentioned mutualism. We know that you're spending more time on this like in the world community. You spent the last 5 years working on decentralized software infrastructure. Gnosis is, you know, very obviously one of the biggest building blocks in crypto. And now a mountainside land regeneration project. It involves mutualism, it involves the wilderness and some wellness traditions. And just, you know, knowing that daylight, like one of the top two things that I think is up on Anjan's whiteboard behind him is usable in the sun, like a computer that's usable in the sun. And I wonder, like, well, it's called daylight, I guess is the other way to talk about it. So like how has that been, you know, and if you'd like to talk about artificial memory at all and how, because from what I've seen you write, it seems like these things, the ability for you to write this book is intertwined with this decision to be in the mountains as well. And yeah, just like within the context of all of this, would be curious to hear more how it's all going.
Sure. Yeah, so having worked on like DAO tooling through Gnosis for a long time, I worked on the Zodiac DAO tools library, which is like an open library of tools that you can plug into the Gnosis safe for different types of voting. You can plug it in for different types of like co-ownership of assets, and the whole interface looks a little bit like like an old school video game inventory screen, but it's all fully open source. And that was really what I kind of dedicated all of my attention to for 5 years. That was the culmination of it, right? And towards the end of that, I remember I used to live in Berlin, I was sitting by a lakeside, and suddenly I just had this like strong feeling of wanting to work on something that feels much more embodied, feels much more outdoors, feels like this sense of kind of, I think the last piece I wrote while at Gnosis said like, what is wild can also be what is common. So this idea of like, where is the sense of like wilderness or the outdoors or sunlight or kind of bodiness in technology? Because so often going back in between different organizations I'm part of, different communities, even here in the kind of rural countryside, like so often technology and ecology are seen like to be really in opposition to each other. And then in other cultural contexts, it's also like kind of technology is seen as like it's basically reduced to an idea of like software now. It's seen as a kind of city thing and you don't touch it. And it's so clear that the way that software starts coming more and more onto different hardware devices, but more and more kind of gets embedded in the environment, that these things are deeply entwined and will continue to be even more and more deeply entwined in a way that's like almost unfathomable to us now. So it was super nice to see like the Daylight launch, because I think that like the more we can understand screen-based technology, but technology itself as being like as embedded as a forest, like the much more we'll be able to understand and shape technology that feels convivial, that feels as though it's somehow not kind of drawing the lifeblood or kind of, you know, sucking the light out of the room. And so, yeah, in my own practice now kind of focusing on writing, it's also related to the previous discussion. Is like a friend asked me the other day, like, what is it like now to finally be where you are in the mountains and just have time to write? And the truth is that no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing in life, there's always lots of things to attend to, always lots of things to do. And I've been involved more in kind of doing volunteering in the local land trust, and you know, there's always a million things. So even this idea of like retreating is when you retreat and you still want to be in the world just comes at you different ways. But this book, Artificial Memory, that I'm working on along with I started a Substack, is basically thinking about how memory exists outside of being thought of as like really tied to specific digital infrastructures. So somewhere around the kind of 50s, you know, after Turing's work, we started really strongly identifying, and von Neumann's, we really started strongly identifying the concept of memory with the concept of digital memory. So something that can be kind of retrieved, recalled, and in a way like infinitely replicable, or various different like iterations of that. But we basically kind of one-to-one understand memory as data. And now when you see a lot of kind of articles published about different scientific studies related to memory, it's always using the language of computing. It's always thinking about the kind of like definite space in the mind for the ability to recall and restore. But we all know, and also studies show that whenever you recall memory, it fundamentally changes. And there's this kind of like working from this idea of like malleability. I got really interested of like, well, where then does this memory reside? And I'm not a strict materialist by any means, but just the metaphors we have are very materialist in how we think about it. So then looking more and more like, well, where does memory actually exist? And like, how does it exist in our technologies and between us and our technologies? So I looked at like really old memory practices, basic things like kind of, I think it's coming back into kind of normal discourse, but memory palaces. So how we understand memory as a basic kind of spatial experience, where for some reason, like if we embed different ideas, if you want to remember the 9 planets and you want to remember facts about them, if each one of them becomes like a kind of tree or corner of your block or soup, like, and you kind of start building up facts in those places, somehow those kind of stories will stay with you much more than if you were to just kind of memorize a list. So looking at the spatial quality of memory and then thinking about how technology relates to that, the project of artificial memory is a lot about thinking about how there's this great book I read recently, everyone's like, it's a classic, but I just learned about it, called Cognition in the Wild. So it's actually looking at a study of kind of like basically aboard a bunch of Navy ships, but just this really highly protocolized space for how does like a distributed system of engineering, people, really unexpected, you know, water, wind, etc. How does the system have memory and store memory between it and act as a kind of memory? And the idea is that this kind of cognition or memory exists in the wild. And similarly, like a scientist like Michael Levin has been doing lots of experiments to show that actually cognition, we think it lives in the brain right now, but a lot of his experiments, I can maybe link to them if anyone's interested, you can reach out to me, but show that actually cognition is not simply stored in cognitive or neural infrastructure. It's much more embodied in the body and in the environment itself. So to wrap that all up, I think like a lot about environment, technology, and the merging of the two, and the fact that they only recently have we conceived of them in any way as being separate.
That's, I mean, fantastic. Cognition in the wild, and then not just in our neural pathways, but in the environment and in the body. I wonder, Anjan, if that brings up anything for you, and you know, if particularly if we can go to phototropism as this idea of just like building what's interesting. It's like, I think you're with the believers here, and you know, Daylight, you've gotten to launch the V1. It took 6 years. You thought it might take a couple. You know, you and Melissa and many others have worked tirelessly to get the first version out. There's one way to talk about the present and what happened in the last 6 years, which is just like how's it going? How are the sales going? How's like the day-to-day grind of like the V1? And then I think you're also in a room with people that are hopeful about like computing and knowing that you've put forward another possible way, and that a lot of the things that Kia is talking about in terms of cognition beyond neural pathways is something that like you would resonate with. So like knowing how the path is going from here, like on a maybe technical level, or like seeing Daylight in the wild level, like what exciting uses you've seen of Daylight, what you're hopeful for the V2. Like we could head in those directions in relation to some of the things Kia just spoke about.
Wow. I'm really ADHD. Can you ask me a more specific question? And I will inevitably cover the ground, but
yeah. So cognition in the wild, from Kia, just talked about cognition being in the environment and in the body. How has Daylight's initial use excited you about like the ways that you've seen it used, and what are you excited about in terms of where it can go?
I think the short version of the answer is like, I'm surprised how much of it is like an emergent intelligence, like an emergent property, which is amazing because it's sort of more than you expected as the creator, or more than you sort of intended as a creator, or more than the sum of its parts. And what I mean by this is like, the software on the Daylight is still really, really, really early. It's like really, really, really basic. So I was like, we would need to do a lot in software to make, you know, the internet more safe and less distracting and protect you from your worst indulgences. And, you know, it's all, you specify that these websites, please block them, or please set a 60-second timer that I need to go through before I get to Instagram, or blah, 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 blah. So I thought the software needs to provide that for you. But I've been sort of stunned by how just the different cognitive frame or context Daylight puts you in. I suspect most of it is because of the different display, the sort of paper-like black and white display. But some of it might be the framing, the branding, which you expect it to be. But like a lot of people have been like, yeah, I put like Twitter on this thing, and I don't get addicted to Twitter. Like I don't doom scroll. I'm like, wait, what? I get how like Instagram or TikTok may not be very addicting on this thing. Like it's black and white. Like that's all colorful stuff. That's not going to be that interesting. But like Twitter's text. This is really surprising. And so when I ask people, nobody can sort of say why. They're like, I don't know. It's like I sort of put it on my home screen. Like it's like right there too. It's not like I put it in the background. And the answer consistently is I don't know. And I think what's so fascinating about that is like there's some emergent property that is like greater than the sum of its parts that allows you to be sort of a version of yourself that is like far more aligned. And it's not like Twitter is bad. Twitter's just bad when you want to spend 10 minutes on it and you spend 40 minutes on it, or you want to do something else and you're on Twitter. It's the black hole effect of sort of scrolling. That's, I think, the problem, the gravity, not the actual medium. I mean, it's sort of like jacking yourself into a matrix. Like it's sort of super normal. And that's like great, but you probably don't want to be in that all the time. And so the fact that people are sort of being a more willful, intentional, disciplined version of themselves without efforting or trying, I don't know if you would put that in the category of intelligence, but it definitely feels like there is some extended intelligence, some emergent intelligence that comes there. And I think that's probably the most powerful thing we can do, where it's no longer about the object and its feeds and speeds and its spec. And guys, it's got 12 gigs of RAM. Please buy it. Our processor can do Final Cut Pro in like 32 seconds for instead of 52. Like it sort of is like, I don't know why, but it seems to be better for you, or to put it more precisely, it makes you a better version of yourself and your intention. And the people who are using it are like, I don't know why, but it seems to make me sort of a better version of myself and more aligned with my intention. And then the sort of product that's being created is the new relationship, is the new version of yourself versus the damn product that's in your hand. And I'm just like really fascinated to play with this thread for the products like we're going to come out with, and the things we do. And it's sort of humbling as a creator too, because you're like, oh, what if I like change something that I think will improve it for the second generation and like ruin this emergent effect, right? Like, I don't know. I increase the contrast of the display in a certain way, and now it no longer feels like old paper or something. So it sort of is a new way of acting as a creator, where you don't actually know what might be all the different ingredients that led to this. So I think it's a different sort of company. It's a different sort of product management. It's a different sort of thinking when the way your product has impact, the sort of emergent intelligence is not something you can point at and turn a knob on. So.
Fascinating, yeah. I took a note earlier, Q, when you talked about computers sometimes sucking the light out of the room. And it's something that I'm reminded of when Anja's talking about the emergent properties, but just anything, like, I guess this is really my last question. I want to open it up from here, but anything that either of you wants to say about memory, knowledge, and agency. These are the three words that I'd like us to spend time with. Kia has helped us a lot with memory. When we talk about knowledge, I think just in this conversation, we've expanded knowledge, intelligence in these directions of the body, in the directions of it can be stored in the environment. And maybe, just maybe, the fact that we spend hours of our days in front of screens has an impact on like the type of knowledge that we are able to be aware of. And I guess the part that stands out to me is this idea that like you can really tell when somebody actually knows something in their own body. And that's when it starts to change your feeling around them, the quality of your own life, the quality of the life of the people around you. It's like my friend Marcos, who's in KBX, is a really good chef. And what that means is if there's ever 15 or 20 people around and we ever want to have a meal, the option is on the table that we just cook it at home. And that changes everyone's kind of possibility set. And so I think that like that changing of the possibility set, that style of knowledge is what I'm curious about. And if either of you has thoughts on how, I suppose, like our tools can encourage it, or how you've experienced it in your own life.
Sure. I'll just quickly say a few things also in relationship to what was just said too. Yeah, I think, and also in the way that the conversation started out, is like I believe that like sometimes it's not possible to think certain thoughts unless you're in a particular state, like whether it's relaxed with friends or whether it's kind of outside reading. And I think that like a lot of we have this idea that to some extent, like um, you know, everyone's like individually responsible for everything that they know. But I think in reality, we're often like what we think is actually often more than we would like to think a product of our environment or network position. So yes, we can change and we can kind of like radically push back against it and have our beliefs change. But still, like we often, this is why you get a lot of interesting thought in different geographical areas or from different kind of groups of friends or different kind of like people who think together in the same group chat. It's like through that relationship, like a lot of ideas emerge. And similarly through like different states of the body, whether it's like real relaxation, whether it's a feeling of safety or freedom or agency, like you're able to think different thoughts when you're in different states. And I feel that like the way that we relate with most hardware that gives us the interface to software now, like puts us in this state of like deep arrest quite often. Like there's always something to be checking. There's always something new that's happening. There's always something that these days like feels unsafe, essentially. And like it's actually literally, I think, not possible to think certain thoughts or feel certain things when that's like the state of being. And this is not historically new. This is why, like, yeah, it's a much longer history and why we want to work towards forms of kind of mutualism and freedom that allow people to have these kind of network positions that allow them to think in different ways, right? And so I think a lot of like knowledge agency, et cetera, is like very much about creating these convivial environments in relationship to our technology. Like this idea of like, it's not going to like put you into a panic as its default mode. It's not going to like uselessly spy on you all the time and sell your data to advertisers, because that's like really something the human psyche is not used to dealing with. Like usually when you're in a room, you're just in a room and it's not kind of globally accessible. So this idea of convivial technology is really much about like how are people experiencing the conditions to be able to think new types of thoughts, produce new types of objects, to feel relaxed with friends, etc. Like they're all very related to like, and I think a lot of like, in recent days, like not only like in relationship to privacy, but if you think about privacy, there's lots of reasons why just civil liberties are important. But I also think like we want high social trust environments. And by that factor, we want to know that like when environment is private, it's private, because like having a like paranoid civil society is really bad for civil society. You want something to do what it says it's going to do and not to do other things. And right now our technology says it's going to do something and does loads of other things. So it's really creating, how do we create like a high trust digital technology feels really important to institutions.
Anjan, do you have anything you'd like to
No, I don't think I could say anything smarter than that.
add? Wonderful. I do want to open it up from here. Really, anyone who has thoughts, questions, considerations, there's some really good stuff in the chat. Justin, please. Well, anyone who wants to raise hand or just feel free to unmute.
Yeah, thank you both. And I have a question for Anjan, I think. It's more like a request. Last block, you kind of went into a little bit of a narrative around like the emergent nature of being this kind of creator or catalyst or, conduit for this technology to come through and what it took for you to kind of get to where you are. And I wonder if you could maybe felt true to kind of offer a bit of that story here today about kind of the trial and error process of learning or that kind of journey you took to be able to learn and figure out what it took to build what you build in and kind of where you are today. Is that cool?
Yeah, thanks for asking, man. I've actually noticed something in myself. I spent a lot of the last year for the launch, like sharing a lot about the story of what it took to get it off the ground. The sort of campy line that headlined it for me is it's like there's something appropriate about a company about daylight, literally called Daylight, working in the shadows for 6 years. It's like Plato's cave or something. I have actually struggled to sort of share the story this year. There's a way in which the adrenaline and excitement of the launch sort of wears off a bit, and now I'm like, damn, it was a pretty traumatizing 6 years, almost 7 years now. Like, if I'm really like soft and supple about it, it's like it's hard to talk about. There's like a lot of emotions that come up, and this doesn't sound like main to the Daylight story, but I think it was main to my story, which was like it really was painful for me because I'm like I was basically incompetent as a manager. I think I'm okay as a leader, but I'm a terrible, terrible manager, and it was like really hard for me to be like, I'm trying to help the world. I'm trying to like do something good for people. Like I no longer have that in a sort of like I need to. It's just like whatever. This is my hobby. But it was really hard for me to see, like, because of my incompetence as a manager, like people inside the company sort of being like affected. And yeah, I just saw the word burnout there, like being burnt out, and like not having the best time. And in my mind, I was like, oh man, I'm like trying to make the world more humane, and I feel like Daylight as a company back then was like inhumane. And for no sort of bad malevolent reasons, like let me make everybody work really hard or this. It's just sort of like there's a reason companies are run the way it is. It's like it's it's hard to sort of do things from first principles. It's harder to do things from love versus fear. Like in many ways I felt like in trying to really listen to people or really empower people, I know it's a skill level thing. It actually felt like I more disempowered people. People felt less heard in the short term. And so that was just like hard to feel this sort of hypocrisy or contradiction. And so I'm glad I sort of kept going at it and didn't take it too personally, like understood it's part of the learning curve. I think I'm a lot better now. I think the company culture is tremendously better. And, Melissa, who's on this call, plays a really key role in that. That's some of the stuff that's just like was really hard to sort of feel like a hypocrite. One other small example of that is like one of the main reasons I made Daylight is like I love reading, and I sort of feel like there could be a lot to be gained by, reinventing reading for the digital age. And so in the same way crypto is, reinventing all these social institutions and social technologies for the digital age. It's like I saw that somebody was making fun of Balaji in the chat. I thought that was hilarious. But yeah, he's like says like the Kindle's like a scanner. You're taking the analog thing and you're sort of just putting it in a digital place. But for all intents and purposes, it's analog. What if you rethought the book totally, like the primer or primer from Diamond Age, to be this sort of interactive, magical, almost like Tom Riddle's diary, sort of thing with the book. And at the same time, I'm sort of like, my walls are covered in this stuff and I think about it all the time. I'm like not reading at all. And it's like, yeah, Daylight's busy, yeah, getting a product off the ground. But I sort of was like in an intellectual bearish period, sort of going with this phototropism thing. I just didn't feel like reading. I didn't feel like fucking gaining shit or, being smarter. Like I just wanted to listen to music. And I felt like a fraud. Like I'm sort of like going around telling people like, let's reinvent the book. And I'm like not reading books at all. And so, Justin, maybe one reflection is sort of, I feel like I wish I was less harsh on myself for being a hypocrite because it's sort of sometimes part of the process. And I sort of am also proud that I trusted that my good intentions would eventually like work itself out. And like I'm reading again, but like I'm reading like Artemis Fowl and Pendragon and like fucking Percy Jackson. Like I'm reading like kids stuff and I like young adult stuff, and it's like awesome. It's friggin' awesome. But it's like it's my own journey of like coming back. Yeah, I'd love to read Philip Pullman's stuff now. That seems really interesting. But it's sort of like coming back to just like what's enjoyable versus like what is good for me or what will make me a better this. And so I don't know. I guess that's like sort of a rant.
Yeah, I just wanted to also chime in there of like, thank you for your honesty as well, because I also felt kind of leaving Gnosis after the 5 years. It was the question of either taking what I'd built as its own company or kind of taking some time off. And realizing at the end of the 5 years that I had planned the entire time to spin it out as a company, spend another 5 years doing it, going the whole way. And then I realized right kind of at the last moment that I was extremely burnt out. And also that at times I hadn't been as good a manager as I wanted to be. It's like, it's really hard to both want something to succeed and to have the kind of adrenaline necessary to like keep yourself going in the narrative, and then also have the extra compassionate space to like be with others and in the way that you need to be. So yeah, I just wanted to say I appreciate the honesty, and like only now am I starting like a larger new project and kind of like stealth mode, and just it takes time to recover from that stuff. And that's like just I think for anyone on the call doing projects, like that's kind of part of it. And like I think that the more grounded and better you are, so the more you can be honest with yourself. And like part of that honesty is like first being compassionate with yourself too.
Oliver, go ahead, please.
Thank you, sir. Hi, everybody. I'm Oliver, and I'll bring my comment out of the Zoom chat about my somewhat crappy comment about the death of the author, because I meant it with nothing but love. I think about this a lot at my day job. I work most of the time I spend thinking about MetaMask, which is a really interesting piece of work because it's self-custodial, right? It's open source technology that we've put out there for people to do whatever they want to do with it, yeah. And so it's very much like a, putting something out there, putting a product out there that, and in a way, hardware, right? Hardware is very much self-custodial. I spend a lot of time thinking about that as well. I have lots of old stuff around that I try to fix and make work. And sometimes there's a manual, sometimes there's not, right? But when you put something out there that people, that isn't just a consumable good, but it's a thing that people are going to use, then all of a sudden, they're going to use it in ways that you didn't intend. And in a way, that's the mark that you have succeeded, right? When there's a community around your thing, or there's a community around modifying your thing, or like, hey, if you break it in this really cool way, you can do this with it. Like that's a really good thing. Yeah, I heard about Daylight a while back, and I was really excited about it. But it was because like I want to code with it, and it's like I don't think that was the intention behind the spirit of Daylight, right? Like put more information into my brain now. But I like other things about the hardware and about the thing. Like it would work really well for me. Hence my question about Linux, right? So and the death of the author, that's I assume there's a lot of people in this group that are familiar with that phrase, but just to draw the line in case anybody doesn't know about it, this is an idea that like not the literal death of the author, right? But the idea that the author's original intentions and context at a certain point fail to matter, and the reader or the community or history gets to decide what the meaning of your writing is, and of course it can change over time. And I think that's a really beautiful aspect to open source software and hardware, in particular open source hardware, because most Android phones just go in the trash at the end of their lifetime. So, all right, that's my thought. Thank you, Vivek.
Yeah. Thank you all. Keep it rolling, John, Jan.
I'm really enjoying this conversation, and I'm regretting a bit getting partly distracted by the threads and the anyway. I kind of want to call back a bit to some of the themes. Well, first off, I can really relate to this idea of burning out, the sort of irony of burning out trying to build convivial technology. I was working on a startup that we were trying to build technology to underpin a regenerative economy, and I hit a wall and had to go to New Zealand for 3 months to ride my bike to even kind of start to get over it. But I'm slowly making my way back, and I'm just reflecting on really how fortunate I feel to be kind of on a path where I can effortlessly engage with the world, and where that sort of, oh, I'm just going to do the easy natural thing tends to break towards building up my higher order self. And you know, I've built a good fitness habit. I love it. I feel good. Not going to the gym or going on a run or something makes me feel worse. So for me, like taking the easy choices, not sitting on the sofa and eating Doritos. But Kia, you said we're a product of our environment and our network position. And one question I've been asking for a while is, to what extent is curiosity a privilege? And I'm curious about, one of the things I've kind of been wrestling with is just the immense forces that seem to be drawing us into this lower order state. And Anjan, you talked about how kind of the sun serves as this subtle attractor. And right now, the attractors that we're facing are not subtle, right? I kind of jokingly call it the tits on Instagram problem. Like, I don't like going down the Instagram rabbit hole, and I get off of that and feel bad, but I still do it occasionally. And so I just want to ask a little bit about, especially given my belief that convivial technologies need to be consensual and opt-in and not coercive, that people need to choose this. How are you thinking about, it seems to me like the activation energy required to make that switch at scale seems really high, and that also the potential consequences of us not making a switch away from these patterns that are drawing us into our lower order state might be really profound and bad. And I guess, yeah, as kind of builders of convivial technologies and ones who hope to maybe encourage this state change, can you talk a little bit about how you think about that?
Can you ask that in an ELI 5 way?
How do we orchestrate a switch to healthier habits when it comes to the way we live and especially the way we use technology, when the forces that are holding us into these unhealthy patterns are so strong?
ever seen this, like, I don't know if it's like a meme, but somebody like took a photo and it's like a post-it note that says 0.99 to the power of 365. And at the end of the year, like the number is like incredibly tiny. And then it has number 1 to the power of 365. And at the end of the year, it's just 1. And then it's got 1.01 or 1.001 to the power of 365. And at the end of the year, like that's a sizable number. And the point here is like I don't think there is any like you do this immediately everything's better. It's like trench warfare. It's like the little cracks of light. It's like the little slight improvements. It's the little like space where previously there was no space. It's like the little flexibility where previously it felt rigid. The little presence where previously it was in fear. I think that creates that 1.001, the 1.01. That if you just compound that every single day, I think you look back and you're like, whoa, I spend way less time on my phone. Like, whoa, I'm like sleeping consistently. Like, whoa, I'm like less grumpy in my first meeting of the day. And so I think the thing that connects all of that is probably like self-compassion, like having the right sort of friends and accountability buddies and partners and people around you, and then environmental design. Like, you can put cookies on the countertop and then be like, I'm going to fight that force of the cookies. Or you can put cookies on like your top cupboard. You don't need to completely get rid of them. And you're just like eating less cookies. Like the gravity is different. And so I think it's a similar thing here too. Like the attractive forces operate on R squared. So if you move it, 1.5 times as far, you get quite a big difference in the sort of force it has on you. And so I don't know if we'll just share my personal life. Like one thing that I really struggled with is I keep snoozing the alarm. And then on my phone, and I'd be like, why do I have my phone as my alarm? And then I bought like a separate little Android phone that was just like for an alarm. And then I moved it to my daylight. And then the daylight's like optimized towards battery life. So sometimes it kills the alarm app in the back. Like, well, we'll make it better. And so I'm just like, shit, I'm not waking up. Rather than sort of just trying to like fight it with willpower, I just kept trying every day to find like a more clever way to do it. I read how like native people like drink a shit ton of water at night, so they like wake up because they have to go pee. I tried that, but I just went back to bed. But like rather than give up, I just kept going. This is where self-compassion helps a lot because it's more like play rather than like doing it well. And ultimately, the thing that worked is I got a HomePod because it doesn't feel like a gadget. It just sort of feels like like a thing in my bedroom now that plays music. And I have like a playlist of music I really love. And so the HomePod will just start playing that music as my morning alarm. And it's just like good music. So I don't get up in a fuss and like try to turn it off or tell Siri like turn that shit off. I sort of just like lie there and I'm like, this is good music. And so within like sort of 15 minutes, I'm up and then like I sort of go and amble over and brush my teeth. And so I sort of get some of the benefits of snoozing, but I don't snooze. And I feel like this is just such a profound difference because I start each day with like sort of joyous music versus this feeling of like triumphing over the snooze button or losing to the snooze button or fighting or disciplining or willing. And somehow that just being the first touch of the day has led to this huge ripple effect throughout the rest of the day. I think it makes me slightly less addicted to things. I think it makes me less likely want to take my phone out if I'm waiting in a burrito line. So I think that was my 0.01. And we just got to keep doing a ton of these all over the place. And I think the only way we can do that is in community, right? Like we each discover a little hack. We each discover a little thing. And that's sort of why I guess like it's such a big genre on TikTok is like look at this DIY life hack, but it's like, it's all fucking nonsense. Because it's always easy to pander than to help. But in so much as we have these more intimate communities, how can we share these little things with each other and understand we're all different, we're all diverse. Like what helps me is not going to help you, but it doesn't mean like some of it's not going to land. So I'm sort of convinced environmental design is like a key part of us, increasing the distance to these attractive forces that are not the best for us.
Yeah, I'd agree with all of that. like, won't name any names, but I know someone who uses an old phone and keeps it in a time lock box and has certain periods that they look at social media. Like the forces we're up against are like extremely strong, that like people are starting to go to like extreme measures to be able to combat them. And I think one thing to keep in mind there is exactly that of like how I've found I've just changed my habits over time is really finding like things that give me joy in a way that feels like nourishing and grounded, and having that kind of in the space of the thing that used to kind of like stoke me up. And so it's rather like than denying or shooting, but like finding something that feels good in its place in a way. And similar to that of like, so much of habit is social too, so needing community, but like, you know, if many people have like kind of daylight computer and it's like you all get them out, like you go to the park and there's friends you read with, etc., like that is a super powerful force, because I think what keeps us back and what makes these forces so strong is that you know, especially for me, like being outside of the city, like a lot of these apps and a lot of these technologies are like how you stay connected or stay social. So like find ends like you're like, oh well, it's negative in this way, but this is like a connection to like people that I know from all over different places. Like I don't want to lose that. So figuring out like new modes of like just shifting the technology a little bit and keeping the socialness of it. Because otherwise you have to choose between socialness and technology, and that's a terrible trade-off.
The Jan and then Vesta and Melissa. 15 minutes left on my call, so.
Yeah, hey, thanks. This was really interesting. So yeah, I took a lot away about different ways of organized building technology, relating to technology, and kind of this focus on well-being. And I think what I'm wondering about is the future of organizations or internet native organizations. So it seems like that would certainly be a part of it, of encouraging this kind of more, healthier, more developmental, convivial relationships. And I was wondering what else, comes to mind in okay, how might organization look like in the future, and ideally in the future we like.
I don't know if I'm answering your question, so just like push back if I'm going in the wrong direction. But I think this is sort of my opinionated rant on this. I think internet organizations and communities are far too inviting. I think that's like one root problem, is like people are too nice and too inviting. And there's like a strong argument, like origin of life researchers say, that like the most important decision that early life made was what to let in and what to push out. And in many ways, that is the definition of life. Is the difference between an inner and an outer. The inner is autopoietic, and the way it's autopoietic is it lets in certain things and it pushes out certain things. Lets in food and nutrition and pushes out toxins and waste. And I think so much of the potential benefit for things is if you then have a high curation of the folks you let in. You keep it small enough, you don't get all the weird, scale and post Dunbar number crap. Then actually, like, you can have an environment of high trust, and then things can be very different. And I don't think we need sophisticated social technologies and voting mechanisms and all of that to be high trust. All that stuff's really nice and helpful and can sort of allow us to do things that even today the best, sort of local physical groups can't do, hunter-gatherer groups can't do. But I think actually we're missing a lot by leaving on the table. Like, there's so much that can be gained by who you let in, and importantly, therefore, who you don't let in, and also the process of how you let in people, right? Like, think of a lot of more indigenous communities. They have like strong hazing rituals to go from being like a boy to a man. And like they sort of let everybody in because everybody feels a social pressure to do it, but it's like intense. And it's just like, we make fun of frats for having sort of these horrible hazing rituals, but it's like they're at least in a way directionally correct, even though it's sort of stupid the way they do it. And so I don't know. I wonder what this sort of positive hazing, positive initiation rites, like positive, like filtering processes are for online communities. And then when everybody knows everybody that's there has gone through a similar experience and it's intense and it's high filtration, there's a certain vulnerability and trust that's possible. And I think that's the currency we turn everything else into. So I'm not sure if that's what you're asking.
Yeah.
It is, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. And before I started focusing on software, I worked on a lot of projects about kind of bringing communities together and different types of participation and mutualism and other things. And like, especially in the early days, it was very much like you kind of open the door and you say, everybody come, we're all going to participate. It'll all be consensus based. And this is in my early 20s, and I just got wrecked like several times. And I think several people in the community did too, of just the kind of open community dynamics, sometimes like invite someone who's really destructive to the core ethos, or just the general kind of tyranny of structurelessness can kind of take its toll. So I think like, in 2021 and 2022, we saw this kind of explosion around DAOs where it was really exciting because it was like, there's this like old like Timothy Leary, like find the others, like on the internet, it kind of started feeling finally possible because you didn't have such strong barrier to finding people. Especially that's what feels so sad about the kind of like loss or change of a lot of social networks now is like you used to really be able to find people with like your niche interests or who would expand your interests without having to sift through loads of other stuff in the process. And so it felt like, oh, you can find the others, be permissionless, like suddenly like geographic boundaries or other types of boundaries matter much less. Let's do that. Let's go fully in that direction. Then you go fully in that direction, then you kind of learn that like, oh, you need some membrane, you need some shared context. It doesn't need to be in the same place. You don't need to have the same background, but like there is that kind of sense of shared experience, right? And so I think in relation to internet native communities, like some of why it worked and why I used to reference more commonly like kind of gaming communities when there would be guilds or from like like large online games is like people actually, those games are really good at dispute resolution among conflict because those people had the shared experience of the game world and had real kind of stakes to them in the game world that weren't immediately mediated between belonging to the community or not. They were kind of playing a shared game, even if they weren't interacting with each other. Whereas like when you get the kind of how a lot of DAOs functioned a couple of years ago and still to some extent now is like, there's no shared context from which people are entering the organization. You're just there and you're in. Whereas like games, you're kind of like, you've been through challenges. You've maybe like adopted a persona. You've like done things. And like, that's where I feel that a lot of organizations, whether internet native, or maybe there's local chapters or otherwise, like what is a shared experience and context that brings everybody rather than the other way around of everybody brings themselves there and then has the shared experience of like it falling apart. Yeah.
Best, please.
Yeah, I really, really enjoyed both, like everything that you all had to say. I want to quickly shout out, there's a project called Tonk that I learned a lot about in terms of like trying to filter for a vibe. And one of his talks, like it comes from, the gaming world, the autonomous world scene. And in that talk, he goes through like how they try to solve for that problem. And like they built something called Speakeasy, where like based on different URLs, like a community could decide, okay, like this is how we're going to filter for a vibe. So we can have like this cozy space, but it's still open, but people can get filtered. I might share that separately. But yeah, I just wanted to quickly like I posted like a little diagram to kind of share how like I've been I called it like a cultural crosscut because when I've been trying to learn about how I learn in this space for the past like many years, because a lot of the time I do feel really like incompetent, but to some degree like a weirdly inverse competent in another way. And I've noticed that when I'm looking at culture, I am assessing like where this person comes from geographically, like the natural environment that they're in terms of where in the world the city or suburban environment that they're in, like the human-made environment. Like I see how that shapes their thinking, and then I can see how that shapes even like how they behave, and then which groups they hang out with, and then directly into like the technology that they're into and what they're building. And so like I've gotten a little bit obsessed with like looking at something that I'm interested in, and then using that as a metaphor in my own body, and then finding the same metaphor in the city infrastructure and like protocols basically on different levels. So yeah, a lot of what you were saying, Kia, really was resonating and really interesting to hear. And yeah, excited to see how this space evolves. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. And yeah, I think like exactly the way you articulated it, it's like there's a kind of filtering, and it's like, and it's not that like everything has to be the same to pass through the filter, right? It's just the sense of everything has had the experience of passing through the filter. And it's like, and it's like, how do you do that in a way that's like mutualistic and pluralistic and kind of designs for that, rather than just the kind of hard wall, yes, computer says no version. And I think that's what a lot of the work that the Summer Protocols group related, if people are familiar with it, like thinking about like what are the kind of actually messy real world protocols by which these organizations come together and operate, rather than just kind of like buying a token or going through an extreme ritual or like literally like climbing a wall, but yeah, thank you.
Check. Melissa, did you still have something? We do have time.
Yeah, I only have a few moments left before I got to jump into another call, but I wanted to thank you guys for bringing me onto the call. And yeah, it's interesting because I come from the like evangelical missionary space, then to the art, like creation collective space, now into this world of thinking about creating our computing environments with agency, but also to allow for our environments to be agentic themselves. And there's a lot of rumination right now, but I always go back to this idea of like, or this question of like, what does it mean to be a 21st century human? And it always makes me think of the Mr. Potato Head toy, where the nose can go into the ear and the eyes can go onto the head, and we're having this complete reorganization of our senses, and I think that is what attracts me to topics like this that we're having this discussion about right now. And then especially being inside of the living system of daylight, because for me, I do very like tactical things within the company, but part of my duty is to be a living human and to show up inside of this living ecology here, and to just be like a real live person with all of the imperfections and the very momentary like perfections of making eye contact with someone and knowing like, oh my God, we just had a little win. And it's like the wabi sabi thing, it's like the the perfectly imperfect. So yeah, I just wanted to ramble a moment and thank you guys. And I'd love to consider joining the next block. Seems like we're on parallel vibes here.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for being here. Good luck with your next meeting, and yeah, you left us with some really wonderful things to think about.
Thanks, Vivek.
Steph, if you'd like, perhaps this will be our last question.
Okay, first of all, thanks a lot for your talk. It was very inspiring. It touched on a lot of things. I'll try to make it as short as possible, because it kind of made a lot of bells ring in my mind. When you were talking about like human cognition, something not only being inside of the brain, but kind of in between humans, it made me this idea of like consciousness as an aggregate, not only within human bodies, but also in between human bodies. And then in this technical context, because personally I'm coming from like the dance world, so it's a lot about the communication between bodies, all this kind of invisible fields. So if I think about it in a technical way, how to actually extend the body as this kind of Freudian device of like trying to contemplate its like creation myth of some kind of godlike being, so therefore creating some kind of technical extension that could kind of resemble this kind of act of our mythology. So I look at technology in today where they're doing this neural computing. So they're making human brain cells compute basically. And then thinking of how that could become like a new software, like the consciousness as an aggregate, or this way of computing our ways of our human minds working itself instead of having to go through silicon. So I was wondering like if you had like thoughts on this, or if you see that as a positive thing, because in the dance world that is kind of like the enemy that nobody wants to like deal with, this kind of technological being that would be some form of AI that then would actually be thinking what we ourselves are not aware of that we're thinking. So some kind of like super unconscious that would actually read our unconscious minds because it would be made out of the same stuff. So yeah, and then of course regarding management, how would that actually relate with this kind of like capitalist assumptions that management should come out of this atomic family structures that then also me went through a burnout of like trying to manage something and then only having to resort to this kind of limited knowledge of parenting structures, which always fail on a larger scale. So in short, that's kind of like what I had as a thought and also as a question.
Big one, Kia, if you'd like, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot there. My kind of first intuitive response is, yeah, I think about all those things a lot, and in relation to cognition being between body, between agents, between environments and ecologies, like in relation to like the development of, say, like neurofeedback devices. Like for a new project I'm working on, I've gone kind of like deep into the research of like the current state of the market there. But I think a lot of the paradigm of how we think through kind of neural computation is a bit paradigmatically flawed. And a friend, Kay Alado McDowell, they recently did a talk at the Long Now Foundation, and they also have an essay, I think, of the same name, just on neural media. So they start thinking about it not as like our brains are computers and we're making interfaces to them and interfaces to the world through them, but more of like there's a kind of sensibility and sensing that has like a neural nature. You know, as I said before, I don't necessarily believe that like memory or these things are like, you know, one-to-one concretely located in cognitive infrastructure. But I do think the framing of like neural media is good because it shifts away from that thinking where you have media, like, for example, that used to be broadcast media, where there was a kind of often like centralized node that went straight out to a bunch of consumers. And then there was no way for those kind of consumers of the media to speak to each other through broadcast. And then you get more into networked media where there's actually able for those nodes to be able to speak to each other. And now we're kind of approaching this idea, which has maybe been inherent in the environment all along, of like how many species and minerals and everything talk to each other, but that there is like a certain sensitivity and complexity and neuralness and plasticity of the way through which we communicate with media and media communicates with us. So I really enjoy this framing of like, yeah, that it's a fundamentally different type of structure of the way that we technologically communicate with our worlds and through our worlds. I'll leave it there because we're going to the end of time. Want other response, but
yeah, that's perfect. And thank you for sharing that reference that your friend had written. Kia and Anjan, just thank you, everyone. Thank you. I mean, Kia and Anjan, one thing left to say is just you're both inspirations, and for you to join us as peers, and for you to be in conversation with one another, it kind of fulfills a lot of like small joys for us and all at once. So just thank you for being with us and for being who you are, and may we keep walking it together.
Thank you for sharing the time and inviting us and asking awesome questions. And Kia, it's really great to meet you.
Yeah, likewise. Super nice to meet you. I've been a fan of what you're doing for a while now. So great to hear more of your insights behind it. And also just kernel, like deepest place in my heart and all of like blockchain related ecosystems. So nice to continue doing it. And I'm glad to see you all here. Yeah, take care, everybody.
Take care, y'all. Take